Numbers. I like to ask questions. It keeps me engaged, and hope you do too. What's that? Moses, all right. We call it a book of the law, right? It was written, obviously, in the time of Moses, so it's going to be around 1400 BC. The key word, so I get this material from World Video Bible School and Chuck Horner, who is an amazing Bible teacher. He died this past year, and he did so much for spreading the gospel across the world and giving an online and video platform over the years. There's no telling how many people he got to learn the Word very deeply. And one thing that, as a side note, as we get into Numbers, is he died this past year, as I said. They had a memorial service online for Chuck Horner. And one of the interesting things is that before he decided he was going to try to become a preacher, he was a member of the mafia. So he was in the mafia, and they said he was in Iowa, and he was given the opportunity to go to Chicago to be bigger and deeper in the mafia. But instead, he went to, actually, I see he's going to go to be a preacher. He went and decided to enlist in the military. So one of the biggest, most well-known Bible class teachers in the history of our modern church was actually a member of the mafia at one time, which was, to me, very interesting for multiple reasons. But again, amazing man that did a lot. So there's a key verse. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit loud there. There is a key verse. That's going to be 10:9. 10:9. Let's go ahead and just read our key verse, Numbers chapter 10, verse 9. Numbers chapter 10, verse 9. When you go to war in your land against the enemy who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, and you will be remembered before the Lord your God, and you will be saved from your enemies. That's a theme over and over again as we continue on through here, is that you call on God and He will remember you, particularly if you're doing what He asks you to do. So the lesson from this book, the key lesson, is so awesome, I think, because it's so simplistic. Think about things that God despises, and then you have the theme of this book. The lessons really for us, not the theme, but the lesson. God hates. What are some things that God hates? Okay, yes. Yes, and we remember that from the book of Proverbs and things of that nature, as well as other parts of the Bible. What are some other things that God hates? Okay, yeah, discord. That's a good way to put that. And that kind of hits on what the book of Numbers really hones in on as well. God despises disobedience, very much so. And so we think about, why do I dislike reading the book of Leviticus or Numbers? Lots of times because it's so specific and so detailed. And it's like, oh, man, over and over again. But there's a reason why. He's actually trying to draw the people closer to Him. We, as a church, sometimes maybe, but even particularly here in the time of Israel, God's trying to draw them closer. They may not have understood that. And the disobedience is why there's so much detail. And along with this disobedience, here's the other thing that I really want to drive home as part of our theme for studying the book of Numbers, and it's murmurings, which could sow discord. So it's the murmurings, it's the complaining. God really hates complaining. Boy, are we good at that or what? We're really good at complaining. And so the thing about we have to remember for Israel is that we are the new Israel, and we have to make sure that we're not in the murmuring business. We're not in the complaining business. And sowing discord, as Conrad pointed out, lots of times that's kind of spurred or stimulated from people complaining or not going about it the correct way. There may be legitimate complaints, but it's oftentimes not done the correct manner. So the book of Numbers, it shows about the Israelites' growth, both as worshipers and warriors. They're going to be fighting some battles. And one of the neat things about Numbers is that if we really try to apply what they went through and then put it in the context of the church, then we can start saying, this book of Numbers that I really don't like reading can be helpful for us. And it's also a commentary on God's providence, so how God takes care of us. And one thing about God's providence is we don't know how He does it. That's in God's eyes. That's His realm. We don't really want to know how He takes care of us, really, because you might think we're too smart. So God is always providentially taking care of us. We pray for people to heal. We pray for this and that. We don't know how it happens, but He answers them in His will. All right. So, the thing that the Old Testament, really to me, in a nutshell, is when the people are disobedient and rebellious, what's God do? He punishes them, and then they repent eventually, and then He restores them. That's kind of the Old Testament to me in a nutshell, and that same thing here in the book of Numbers. He's trying to bring them closer to Him. They were His purchased possession, and that's the thing that He's trying to drive home to them, is that they are special and He wants to be close to them. Let's turn, just for a minute, we're going to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, which I think is a very helpful verse. And then we'll come right back to the book of Numbers. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. All right. What we may do is actually go back a verse or two to kind of get the context of it. But if you read on back in verse 1, it talks about the forefathers, and then in verse 4 it talks about rock was Christ, and their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Going into verse 6 here, now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. And do not become idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents, which is also in the book of Numbers. Nor complain, as some of them also complained, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now verse 11. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Talking about the Israelites in this time frame that we're studying here. So we try to apply this to the church. And if you have some remembrance of what all they went through, even just the big things, they were in the wilderness for 40 years. That's the context of this book, is 40 years. Most of what you read is about the second year and the next to the last year of those 40 years. They went through some tough times. Boy, they went through some tough times. They really did. What we live in today can certainly be tough times. We can liken what we're going through now is we're in the wilderness of the world. They were in their own wilderness. They had that disobedience, so they were not allowed to go into the promised land, which we'll eventually get to. So they're in this wilderness, this wandering, going from place to place. We're very much in this same setup. We're in the wilderness of the world. But think about this for just a second. We have Christ now. They had the pillar of cloud. We have Christ. They had the manna from heaven. We have Christ. They had the rock that gave the water, and we have Christ. And really, we're just pressing on to heaven like they were trying to press on the promised land of their own. Pretty neat stuff, really. So there's some special emphasis in all this writing. We already touched on it a little bit, but there's a sinfulness of fear, the sinfulness of distrust, and the sinfulness of disobedience. All right. So let's get started here in the book. If we go back to Numbers chapter 1. Brother Bob, when's the last time that we've done a study on the book of Numbers? Do you recall? I don't know. I mean, nobody in their right mind would pick this book to study, right? But that's what I do. Keep people on their toes. Yeah. Well, there's probably a reason why. But we'll try it anyway, right? So they're getting ready for a march. They might not know it, but they're getting ready for a march, a very long march, a very specific and detailed march. So the first 10 chapters of this book is dealing with the preparation of this march. They're going to number the people. Remember that. So let's look here for just a second and read verses 1 through 3, which really kind of sets the tone for the book. All right, let's read chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 together here. We'll go ahead and go through verse 4 even. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of meeting, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel, by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually. From 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel, you and Aaron shall number them by their armies. And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one the head of his father's house. So they're getting very specific detail here. Remember, God's looking for a way to draw them closer. He's looking for obedience. He's looking for them to basically, are you going to do what I ask you to do? So think about the highlights here that we just read. All of Israel, by tribe, every male 20 years and up, that's able to go to war. So they may have Dale Purrier in there because he's still able to go to war, even though he might be above 60. They may have David Stanley in there. He's still able to wield an axe. I don't know. But if you're still able to go to war, you're still in that count. Now, one thing that's interesting there on verse 4, it says that you have a person from every tribe who's supposed to be kind of over this. They call them a prince. This would ensure an accurate count, etc. So in verses 17 through 47, we have the census taken. And this is where people are in their year-long reading, and they get the numbers, and they go, and they stop, right? So I'm going to give you the nutshell here, and you can look here in verses 20 through 44, and you can get these numbers should you want them. God desired to do this here, and then in other times he said, don't number yourselves. I don't want you. So it's about obedience. It's about doing what he asked them to do. Whether we understand it or not, at certain times that's what he wanted. Remember, this is at Sinai still. Taken in the wilderness of Sinai. We have all these different tribes here. We have the 12 listed here before we get to the tribe of Levi. And it's confusing to me, so I'm just going to throw it out there. If you were to literally number the tribes, there's 13. Okay? But the family of Joseph, the lineage of Joseph counts as 2. So if you were to list there, if we go through Reuben, Simeon, Gad, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, and Manasseh are both from Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, and then Benjamin, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. But then we've also got Levi. Levi is not going to number right now. Not in this particular reading that we have. We have some of these get pretty big. We have Issachar's 54,400, Zebulun's 57,400, and then we have Manasseh and Ephraim are fairly small. But Judah's the smallest by far. Judah's got 4,600 people. That's far smaller than the others, which is interesting, right? What's specific about Judah that we need to know about? Yeah, that's right. So we're going to have Christ. He's going to come out of that lineage. There's going to be a total number of 603,550. Sometimes the Bible rounds. You have to watch that and not say watch it because it's a big deal, but just take note of that. Sometimes they might round to the nearest 100, but sometimes they might get specific, and we'll see that here in just a second. So again, the tribe of Levi is not numbered. That's in verses 47 through 54. But here's where it gets really thick and heavy. They are supposed to, the tribe of Levi, remember a lot of this is about the cleansing of the people, going back to Leviticus and what the priests are supposed to do. So they're supposed to be in charge of the tabernacle. This tabernacle is not a small deal. This is a big deal. This is not just, hey, I got some tent posts and a tent, we throw it up, we throw it down. It's a big deal. I can't really fathom how big of a deal it is, but we just have to trust and know that it is, because this is, as we were to read all of this, we can see that there's a whole lot to it, a whole lot of pieces. Let's look at verse 50 in chapter 1. And we'll start at verse 47 and get there. Verse 47, but the Levites were not numbered among them by their father's tribe. For the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, or take a census of them among the children of Israel. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They shall attend to it, and camp around the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle is to go forward, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall set it up. The next verse, the outsider who comes near shall be put to death. So the outsider, in this case, we often think about someone who's not an Israelite. In this particular context here, it's someone who is not a member of the tribe of Levi. So you can be an Israelite, and if you go touch these holy things, or you look at these holy things, it's a bad deal. As it says there, put to death. So it's very specific, very serious, very serious. And the reason is he's trying to obviously get them closer to him. He wants them to know that obedience is key, that he's a holy God, and he's trying to help them to be a holy people. So the tribes are they're getting ready for this march that we talked about earlier. The tribes are going to be put in certain places. They're going to be on a certain side of this tabernacle, very specific. So let's look here at chapter 2, verses 1 through 2 to get a taste for what this looks like. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard beside the emblems of his father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. And it goes into each particular tribe is supposed to be on a certain side. So there's 4 sides, as you might expect, to this tabernacle. And there's going to be 3 tribes on each side. Of course, it doesn't matter to us necessarily which tribe is on each side, but on the east, there's Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, for example. On the south side, there's Reuben, Simeon, and Gad. And we could go on down through there. And then in the center of that, we're going to end up having Levi. Levi is going to be around this tabernacle, and then all the tribes are going to be around them. They're going to be at some distance, as it said in their scripture we just read. All right. We're going to scoot on down to verses 32 and 30 through 34 real quick and just recap a little bit of what we've just covered some. All right. So try to keep your mind jogging here. We're setting up this march. We're setting up this big system that God has put forth. And it's a big deal. And we're going to see a little bit about how big a deal it is. These are the ones, verse 32 in chapter 2, these are the ones who were numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses. All who were numbered according to their armies of the forces were 603,550. But the Levites were not numbered among the children of Israel, just as the Lord commanded Moses. And interestingly, in verse 34, it kind of sums this up. Thus the children of Israel did according to all the Lord commanded Moses. So they camped by their standards, and so they broke camp, each one by his family, according to their fathers' houses. They did what they were asked to do. This is not small. I mean, you think about, you're trying to go around and count everybody of a certain age. Hey, how old are you, 19 or are you 20? Are you able to go to war? And this is not small. And they've got down to pretty specific numbers here. You're talking about, I'm going to try to count everybody in Whitfield County. I don't have phone. I don't have internet. I think that's a big deal. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me. Did they have paper? I mean, how did they tabulate this? I don't know, but it's interesting. Does anybody know how they tabulate it? Austin, you ever heard any details on how they did that? I can't count to 100 without double checking myself at least 3 times. And then my wife will come and say, no, you missed that there. I'm like, yeah, I did. So this is interesting stuff for sure. All right. So we get into chapter 3. So we get into the naming of the priest. So who set up the priesthood? Well, whoever's in charge at this point is the one who set up the priesthood. I mean, Moses is really the one who's going to be given all this stuff, and he kind of sets it up, even though Aaron is going to be the high priest. So as a taste for chapter 3, we'll look at these first couple of verses here. Now these are the records of Aaron and Moses when the Lord spoke with Moses on Mount Sinai. Verse 2, and these are the names of the sons of Aaron: Nadab, the firstborn, Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the anointed priest, whom he consecrated to minister as priest. Of course, you know about Nadab and Abihu, and they recount it here. Nadab and Abihu had died before the Lord when they offered up profane fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. So the other two, Eleazar and Ithamar, ministered as priests in the presence of Aaron their father. There's so much learning that can be done from the two that died, Nadab and Abihu. We hear it quite often in our teaching. And it's interesting that they didn't really get the message. That always kind of astounds me, at least not for a little while. You would think that for a little while they would have gotten that message, that we need to be pretty specific. But apparently it didn't really hit home like it should have. All right. So the Levites are to be Aaron's servants. Let's look at verse 5. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, bring the tribe of Levi near and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may serve him. So when it says serve him, this is not like a slave situation where they're going to be trying to bring food and clean Aaron's house. No, this is going to be a deal where they're going to be serving in this tabernacle. They're going to be taking care of the things to do worship and to do what God wants to do in this tabernacle. The work of the tabernacle. This is a big deal. I want you to recall or take home from this that the book of Numbers and what it tells us here is that this tabernacle and what all they had to do is enormous. It's huge. This isn't some little tent that's the size of this building here, and a couple people come in every once in a while. No, this is a huge service and a huge thing. All right. We're going to get to a little bit of that here in just a moment. Before we get there, though, verses 11 through 13, it tells us about that the Levites are set apart, that they are Jehovah's firstborn. So God has set them apart even within. So God had set aside every firstborn of Israel as his own when he killed all the firstborn of Egypt. They were to be set apart for Jehovah instead of the firstborn of all of Israel. This will be the age that all firstborn are to be given up to Jehovah or be redeemed. All right. So these are very special people, and they are the only ones that are going to be in close to this tabernacle, and they're the only ones that are going to be on a daily basis, that is. They're going to be in charge of these holy things. Now we're going to get into actually looking at numbering Levi. It's separate numbering, but it's still a numbering. Let's go down to verse 14. Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, saying, "Number the children of Levi by their fathers' houses, by their families. You shall number every male from a month old and above." So we've got some new standards for this particular tribe. So the duties of the Levites, those who were not Aaron's sons. Those who were not Aaron's sons. And so when we get into Levi here, we've got some different groups within that. So let's not get confused. We have those 12 groups of Israelites and the Levites. But within the Levites, we've got a few names as well. So let's look at verse 38 through 30. Well, let me go back here. Let's go back to go up to 21. Let's say 21. And we'll just look at the names. So in verse 21 there it says from Gershon. You have those names there. If you go down to verse 27, it talks about Kohath. And then in verse 33, it talks about Merari. So there's three separate entities in the Levites, and they have specific things that they're supposed to do. The ones of Gershon, they're supposed to carry the soft goods. So back there in 21 through 26, that's what that covers. And it talks very specific. The duties of the children of Gershon in verse 25 in the tabernacle of meeting included the tabernacle, the tent with its covering, the screen for the door of the tabernacle of meeting, the screen for the door of the court, the hangings of the court. You're talking about very specific things that they could do and they could touch. That was their job. Stay in your lane. Don't get out your lane. You ever heard somebody say that now? That's a big saying now where I work. You're working cattle and you're supposed to be taking weights, and you go over here and you pick up a needle that stay in your lane. Don't be over here in my business. The same thing here with what they're supposed to be doing, except it's a whole lot bigger deal. And the sons of Kohath. This is to me, just reading it as a kind of a layman, 27 through 32, this is kind of the creme de la creme. This is where you're the man and you better pay attention. So verse 27 here. From Kohath came the family of the Amramites, the family of the Israelites. Okay, let's scoop on down to verse 28. According to the number of all the males from a month old and above, there were 8,600 keeping charge of the sanctuary. The families of the children of Kohath were to camp on the south side of the tabernacle, and the leader of the father's house of the families. Okay, verse 31, their duty included the ark. So if you're in charge of the ark, that's some pretty serious stuff. We're not playing around. You know that already. And the table, the lampstand, the altars, the utensils of the sanctuary with which they ministered, the screen, and all the working related to them. So these people who were in the family of Kohath, this group inside of Levi, they've got the serious stuff going on here. And then there are, as we just read, there were 8,600 of them. And if you look back earlier, there were 7,500 Gershonites. And the ones from Merari, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. How would you pronounce that? Merari? There's 6,200 of those. So all told, guys, there's 22,000, and the way the Bible sometimes, they round that number sometimes. They go to 38 and 39. They like that last verse in 39 there, were 22,000. They just call it 22,000. But if you were to total that up, it's around 22,300. So sometimes the Bible will just kind of give you a big number. This is the basic deal here. But if you were to total up all of these groups here in the tribe of Levi, it's actually 22,273. So there's 7,500 of the Gershonites, 8,600 of the Kohathites, and 6,200 of the Merarites. There's 22,000 people. What are they supposed to do? What's their job? What's that? What are these people supposed to be doing? There's 22,000 of them. They're supposed to take care of the tabernacle and serve Aaron and his sons in terms of the ministry of this tabernacle. 22,000. I mean, Calhoun, I don't know how many people is in Calhoun, but it's not far off of 20,000. Dalton's got more than that. That's a lot of folks. This is not a small deal. This is enormous. 3 families, well, families, if you want to call it that. I don't think they're having a Thanksgiving meal with this, but you're talking about a lot of folks. When I've got 8,600 people just to take care of the lampstand, the ark, and some of these holy furnishings, we've got some serious things going on here. All right. Moving on down here, we get into just a little small detail that's interesting, and I'm not sure that I really understand it fully, but we're going to look at verse 43 to 46. Verse 43, and all the firstborn males according to the number of names from a month old and above, of those who were numbered of them, were 22,273. So there's the legit number, the specific number. Now we go into 44. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of all the Levites instead of their livestock. The Levites shall be mine, I am the Lord. Verse 46, and for the redemption of the 273. So they got the 22,000, excuse me. Then there's this 273. God's going to buy them back. He's going to ask them to make a payment for them. There's going to be a transaction here. Verse 47, you shall take 5 shekels for each one individually. You shall take them in the currency of the shekel. It explains what the shekel is there. And you shall give the money with which the excess number of them is redeemed to Aaron and his sons. So there's a buying back of these extra ones, these extra numbering, if you will. Now, just to finish out this thought, verse 49. So Moses took the redemption money from those who were over and above those redeemed by the Levites. From the firstborn of the children of Israel, he took the money, 1,365 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. And he gave the money to Aaron and his sons. So we have some very specific things, is really the thing to take home and drive at here. A lot of specific detail. We've got certain people doing certain things, and even some little details about buying back this certain number with 5 shekels. I mean, this is detailed. I don't like living in this. I'm not a detailed person. My wife knows that more than anybody. She saw me cook lunch yesterday, she goes, or 2 days ago. She's like, oh, what are you cooking? I just took what was in the fridge and I threw it in a pot and I cooked it. I mean, that's what I do. That's how I live. I do feed him. Yeah, she does. She feeds me a lot of times. I feel sorry for her, so I just throw my own stuff together and we go. But that's kind of how I roll. I'm not big on recipes. This is a huge recipe here. Very detailed. All right. So, now if we get into chapter 4, we've got some more numbering. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So this is for the Levites and who's going to really serve. We're going to pin this down. Earlier I was talking about how we're going to have 22,000 serve. It wasn't quite that number. I was overspoke on that one, so my apologies. Because the real people who are truly going to serve physically are going to be between the ages of 30 and 50, and that's in verse 3, you'll see that. And then we can get into more about the Kohathites here in just a second. So in verse 5, in Numbers chapter 4, let's look at this together. Verse 5, when the camp prepares to journey, Aaron and his sons shall come, they shall take down the covering veil and cover the ark of the testimony with it. Then they shall put it on it a covering of badger skins, and spread over that a cloth entirely of blue, and they shall insert its poles. You've got a certain color cloth, you've got a certain skin of an animal. This is over and over again. If you've tried to read the book of Numbers, you remember that pretty quickly, and you remember why I didn't quite remember it or finish it. So very specific. And let's go on down here to verse 15 to kind of sum this up a little bit on what we've talked about so far. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, when the camp is set to go, then the sons of Kohath, remember that was their specific role, their specific duty within the tribe of Levi, shall come to carry them, and they shall not touch any holy thing lest they die. So this specific family within Kohath is given this charge to carry these things, but they can't touch them. Carry, not touch. That's hard. I mean, we know about some other Old Testament examples when they were supposed to carry and not touch. They're doing this a lot, doing this very often. They have to be very conscious of what their appointment is and what they're supposed to be doing. And it says that they're going to die if they don't listen to this detail that we've got here. So again, to reiterate, they're supposed to be between the ages of 30 and 50. That's given here in the verse 23. From 30 years old above, even to 50 years old, you shall number them, all who enter to perform the service, to do the work in the tabernacle of meeting. There's still a lot of people, a good many. We get on down here and we see the completion of the numbering of the Levites in verses 34 through 49. I overspoke earlier. I was talking about there's going to be 20,000 to serve. That's the total families. The ones that are really going to serve is going to be 8,580. That's still a lot of folks. Sorry about my poor recollection there. So we've got 8,580 who are going to be actually serving as in the tent of meeting. But all these families together were around 22,000. All right, now, we've got through a lot of the numbering. You can kind of wipe your brow and take a sigh of relief. We've done through some of the numbering. You survive. We're all still here. Some of you are probably getting hot. Is the heat on too high? We don't want to start complaining and murmuring. So let's go on to chapter 5. So in chapter 5 and 6, this is where it gets interesting. Really interesting to me. This is the weird stuff. You're like, whoa, okay. So just to browse through some of this stuff at the beginning of chapter 5, they've been told to remove all these people that are unclean. If you got a discharge, if you touch somebody that's dead or you're leprous, you need to be outside the camp. God has asked them to do this, and they do it. I'm not sure how they figure out who has a discharge or not. I guess people just volunteer that. But anyway, they know this, and then they figure it out, and these people are to be put out for a certain amount of time. Getting into, I guess, verses 7 and on down, people who, we'll go ahead and look at verse 7 just for a second. This is, people have wronged somebody. You committed a sin against somebody else. You're going to pay restitution for that. Boy, if I'd be broke as a joke if I had to pay restitution to the people I sinned against. So let's look at verse 7. Then he shall confess the sin which he has committed. He shall make restitution for his trespass in full, plus 1/5 of it, and give it to the one who was wronged. And then it goes on down there. If that person's not alive, you give it to this person. If those people aren't alive, you give it to the priest. You'll see that a couple times. And we're going to wrap up to me the most interesting thing, not the most interesting, but the just kind of, where'd that come from, is going to be in verses 11 through 31. So let's look here at verse 11 through 15. So if you haven't been awake till this time, this is the part where you get awake. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, If any man's wife goes astray and behaves unfaithfully toward him, and a man lies with her carnally, and it is hidden from the eyes of the husband, and it is concealed that she has defiled herself, and there was no witness against her, nor was she caught. Okay, that's a lot, I'm sorry. So verse 14, If the spirit of jealousy comes upon him, and he becomes jealous of his wife, who has defiled herself, all right, there's going to be a certain thing that he can do. He can take her to the priest. I'm going to sum this up because it's kind of long to read here. But he can take her to the priest, and he's going to present her, hey, she's done something wrong. We need to prove if she's done it or not. And there's this spirit of jealousy. God said if someone has a spirit of jealousy, you need to take this person before the priest, and the priest is going to make this bitter water in verses 16 through 22. Verses 23 through 28. Then the priest is to write the curse down and scrape the writing off into the water. She is to then drink the water. Okay? If she is innocent, nothing will happen to her. If she is guilty, the water will. Verses 23 through 28, make her stomach swell, make her leg rot. She will then be a curse among the people, and basically she's going to die. This is not a good thing, obviously. So why would God do this? God wants strong families. He wants trust in families. If someone is unfaithful, I guess God takes it very seriously, was what we can summarize that from. Faithfulness in a family is very precious to God. And a very interesting account here about the bitter water and what God terms as a spirit of jealousy. Thank you for your attention on the book of Numbers. We'll see you down the road.